Well, the bell is rung. Glad you're here today. Memorial Day weekend. We got several that are out, I'm sure, traveling. Glad you're here. Beautiful day. We're going to be in Galatians again today, chapter 4, starting about in verse 13, where we'll be starting. We'll begin the word of prayer this morning. And John Paul, would you lead some prayer, please? Verse 13, Galatians 4, 13 through 16. Paul says here, "You know that because of physical infirmity, I preached the gospel to you at the first. And my trial, which was in my flesh, you did not despise or reject, but you received me as an angel of God, even as Christ Jesus. What then was the blessing you enjoyed? For I bear you witness that if possible, you would have plucked out your own eyes and give them to me. Have I therefore become your enemy because I tell you the truth?" It is here Paul is speaking about the first time he met with the Galatians. And we're talking about Galatians, not one particular church, but several churches in the Galatia area. And he says here there was something about him, that some kind of physical infirmity that he had that they overlooked. Now, we don't know what it was, but they didn't hold that against him. They listened to what he had to say and was glad to have him there, received him in a very good way. And whatever that infirmity was, again, we're not told, but again, he speaks well of them for accepting him the way they did. And he says there in verse 14 again, "You did not despise or reject him because of that." That word there, reject, it means to spit at, is what it means, to spit at. Now, how they use this in biblical times versus today is quite different. Today, if somebody spits at you or spits on you, it is because they don't like you, they hate you, they despise you. It's a way of maybe retaliation, something like that, toward you. But in a biblical concept here, the word reject, you would spit at somebody or something to keep them at a distance. You didn't want them close to you because there was a lot of superstition. I know even today there is as well, but during the biblical times there's certainly a lot of superstitions. But if somebody had something, they had the flu, you would spit at them. "You stay away from me. I don't want that." Or if they had some kind of other sickness, let's say they had epilepsy. Individuals who have epilepsy and sometimes they have seizures and such. Well, if you were to be around somebody and they start having a seizure, they may start spitting at them because they're thinking, well, that individual's demon possessed. I want to keep them at a distance. So that's where Paul is coming with here with the word reject. He says, you didn't do that. Even though I had this something, infirmity, and which could have caused you to say, I don't want anything to do with him. He said, you didn't do that. You accepted me. You let me come in and speak with you and teach you. And he's really complimenting them because of what they did, or maybe even what they didn't do. So, but he says there, but something has changed. Something has changed about you, and now have I become your enemy because I tell you the truth. And that's what he's wondering about them now. Here he is, he's speaking the truth to them, and they seem to be rejecting him now. They didn't reject him because of this infirmity that he had. It seems now they are rejecting him because he's speaking to them the truth. And sometimes that will happen with individuals, with friends. Sometimes it will happen even with brethren. You try to speak to them the truth, and they don't want to hear it. And all of a sudden, they don't want you around anymore. They don't want anything to do with you. And that happens. Truth will do that. Truth will cause a separation. And probably you don't have the same friends that you had years ago. And it may be because you decided, I'm going to live a different way. I'm going to live the way of Christ, a righteous way, a godly way. And they're saying, well, I don't want to go that way. And they may, well, you're just too good to hang around with us anymore. They may say that. And it's not that. It's not that you're too good to do so. You have chosen to go a different direction. You have chosen to put other things first in your life. And because of that, it may cause some friendships to be dissolved. It may happen. Well, that's what Paul is telling them here. You accepted me at first, even with this infirmity that I had, but now the truth has caused a problem. He's trying to get over that. 17 and 18. Here he's talking about those who are turning them away from him. They, that would be probably these Judaizing teachers, they zealously court you, but for no good. Yes, they want to exclude you, that you may be zealous for them. But it is good to be zealous in a good thing always, and not only when I am present with you. So somebody, maybe these Judaizing teachers, these Judaizing Christians, we might say, who had tried to go back to the old law, well, they were zealous. Well, they were courting them, trying to show them, you want to go this way. You want to do this. You want circumcision. It's good. You want to go back to that. Go back to keeping special days, and as far as Passover and Pentecost and other days and other things. They were trying to court them to do this, and what they're trying to do is separate them from Paul. He says in verse 18, it's good to be zealous in a good thing, but it seems they were only zealous when he was there with them. So he's sort of getting on to them right here. Whenever he's around, they're acting one way. When he's not around, they're acting another way. They're sort of leaning toward these Judaizing teachers. Verse 19 and 20. My little children, from whom I labor in birth again until Christ is formed in you, I would like to be present with you now and to charge and to change my tone, for I have doubts about you. He still regards them as little children because he was the one that taught them. He was the one that got these churches established. He labored with them. It was difficult. He uses the labor of pain, a birth here, even though it just means something difficult he went through. A lot of time he spent with them, a lot of difficulties he pulled them through. And he says, I like to be with you now. And if I could, he says, I would change my tone of voice. I would be more serious than what I was even the first time. And you know, you can't, if you write a letter to somebody, or nobody writes letters anymore, text message or email or something like that, you can't always express your emotions to them as you could in person. Even you may put it, the words you may put in bold print, or you may capitalize, you may underline, trying to mean something more, emphasis. But really you can't do that. That comes in person. And even Paul realizes here, I'm writing this letter, but if I could talk to you in person, I would tell you something. You can know by the tone of my voice that you need to change, you need to do different. He says, for I have doubts about you now. I have some doubts that you're remaining faithful as you once were, from what I'm hearing. So he's writing these brethren here, trying to get them to turn around and see the error of their way. Verse 21 and 22. Tell me, you who desire to be under the law, do you not hear the law? For it is written that Abraham had two sons, one by a bondwoman and the other by a free woman. So he's asking, verse 21, why do you want to go back to this old law? A law that you could not keep perfectly. A law that you had to keep everything. He's going to keep it at all. And he's going to use Abraham and Sarah and Hagar and Ishmael. He's going to go back there and use them in a minute in a way to show them you don't want to go back to the old way. And he started here in verse 22, but in verse 23 through 26, he says, but he who was of the bondwoman was born according to the flesh, for he is a free woman through promise, which things are symbolic. Now, how many of your versions that you have in verse 24, instead of saying symbolic, it says allegory in your version? Allegory. Some versions use that. What he's about to do here is use an allegory. And we're going to look at what allegory is. He's going to use allegory between Abraham and Hagar, and Abraham and Sarah, and the children that came from that relationship of both of them. He's going to use that as an example of teaching them about what they're doing. Now, what is an allegory? Well, here's what it is, a story within a story. It can be a literal story or it can be a symbolic story. Either way. An example is Pilgrim's Progress. Have you ever read that? If you haven't, you need to read it sometime. I forget who wrote it. Milton? I don't know. It doesn't matter who wrote it. It's a good book. It's about a boy or somebody, and he's going to this celestial city. Great city. He's looking forward to it. And as he goes, he finds those individuals who want to help him get there. And he also comes upon individuals who want to keep him from going. And it's a struggle. He's struggling. The boy's name is Christian. That's his name, Christian. He has friends along the way by name of Faithful and Hopeful. There's one named Ignorance, one named Little Faith. And some of his friends get killed along the way. And they're not really there to help him. Well, he gets distracted one time. He goes to a city. I can't remember the city's name. He goes into the city and they distract him. And then he comes out. And there he gets to the celestial city. He sees it, but between him and the city is a river. Pretty rapid flowing river. He's scared about going through it. But he realizes the only way I'm going to get there, I got to go through this river. And he goes through it, and it almost kills him, almost drowns. But he gets across to the other side, and he makes it to the city. That's the story. But there's a story within a story. That's the way the guy wrote it. Christian is a Christian individual who is trying to get to heaven. And as we get to heaven, trying to get there, we have individuals who want to help us. We have individuals who want to harm us, keep us from getting there. And we have to fight that battle. And sometimes we get distracted. And we go in ways or in places we don't need to go. But we come out. And then that river is death, which we got to cross through in order to get to the celestial city. And we're scared of that river. We don't want to get in that river. But as as the Lord said, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And go through that, and we cross it, and we make it. Now, don't you want to read that book sometime? That's what it's about. And we have friends as well that we help us along the way, and maybe an enemy or two that's just trying to keep us out. And who could that enemy be? He goes through a lot of things. But anyway, that's what an allegory is. The tortoise and the hare, we know that story. You got a rabbit and a turtle racing. But what is the story within the story? You know, the fast don't always make it. You know, the prize is always given to the fastest one. Well, again, that's what allegory is. And that's what Paul is using here. He's talking to the Galatians, and he's fixing to use the story of Abraham and Sarah, Abraham and Hagar, and the children that come from that. He's going to use them as a teaching tool to show them why would you want to go back to the old way. And that's what he does in verse 23 through 26. But he who was of the bondwoman was born according to the flesh, and he of the free woman according through promise. This is Ishmael when he was born. He was born of Hagar. And Hagar, of course, was a slave pretty much of Abraham and Sarah. Remember, Sarah didn't think she could have any children because of her age. Therefore, she says to Abraham, take on my servant lady here and have a child through her. Well, that wasn't the child of promise. The child of promise was going to come through Abraham and Sarah, which would be Isaac. So he's saying to him here, why would you want to take something that God didn't promise? Why would you want to go that route? Why not go the route that God has promised? There's no future another way. And that's where he says in verse 24, which things are symbolic. For these are the two covenants, one from Mount Sinai, which gives birth to bondage, which is Hagar. For this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia, and corresponds in Jerusalem, which now is, and is the bondage with her children. But the Jerusalem above is free, which is the mother of us all. No freedom when it comes to Hagar. No freedom there whatsoever. The freedom is with Isaac. He's the child of promise. He's the one where God's blessings will come through. Eventually, Christ comes through Isaac. No promise was given through Hagar or through Ishmael. And he's saying, why would you want to do that? Why would you want to do that? In 27 and 31, for it is written, rejoice, O barren, you who do not bear. Break forth and shout, you who are not in labor. For the desolate has many more children than she who has a husband. Again, he's talking about Sarah. She could not bear children, and he says she is to rejoice because of what will happen, eventually happen. Verse 28, now we brethren, as Isaac was, are children of promise. But as he who was born according to the flesh, then persecuted him who was born according to the Spirit, even so it is now. Again, it's Ishmael, who was born according to the flesh with Hagar. You have Isaac, who was according to the Spirit, meaning God had a hand in this. And a 75-year-old woman just doesn't have children, but she did at age 90. 75 is when the promise was given. She didn't have a child until age 90. God had a hand in it. So that's what he's saying to the people here. Why would you want to go in a way that God did not authorize, that God did not promise, that it would be anything there for you? So he's showing them this. In verse 31 there, so then, brethren, we are not children of the bondwoman, but of the free. Verse 29, he talks about the persecution there. Remember, Ishmael persecuted in some ways Isaac when he was smaller. And Sarah got enough of it, and she told Abraham, get them out of here. I don't want them around. And Abraham took them out. He took care of them, saw to it that they were cared for, but they were put out of the household, out of the land. Well, again, he's showing that some of these Judaizers who are persecuting you as Christians, who are trying to get you to go to the old way, go back again to the way you once were, leave them alone. They're trying to bound you, put you back into old ways of doing things. You need to be the right way and be with where you have freedom. So he uses an allegory, a story within a story. Again, we know the story of how all that came about, Abraham and Sarah, Hagar, Ishmael, Isaac, but then he uses that to teach them, you don't want to go that way. That way will not work for you. And then in chapter 5, many think, the Bible was not put in chapters and verses. Somebody did that, but they should have included verses 1 through 4 into chapter 4, because it's still pertaining to what he's speaking of here. But in chapter 5, verse 1, he says, "Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty by which Christ has made us free. Do not be entangled again with the yoke of bondage. Indeed, I, Paul, say to you that if you become circumcised, Christ will profit you nothing. And I testify again to every man who becomes circumcised, he is a debtor to keep the whole law. You have become estranged from Christ. You who attempt to be justified by the law, you have fallen from grace." So if you try to keep the old way, it's not going to work. Christ will profit you nothing. It will do you no good. If you want a little bit of the Old Testament, a little bit of the New, and put them together, it would do you no good. And what has happened to you, he says, you have fallen from grace. That's what has happened. And for those who teach today in some churches that you cannot fall from grace, Paul says you can. Not only did he say you can, he says you have fallen from grace. You can lose your salvation. You can depart from the ways of God. So I'd rather listen to what Paul had to say, an inspired apostle here, who says you can fall from grace. And they did. So he's showing them here, you don't want to go back to the old way. It's not going to work for you. You have fallen from grace if you do that. Verse 5 through 9. "For we through the Spirit eagerly wait for the hope of righteousness by faith. For in Christ Jesus neither circumcision nor uncircumcision avails anything, but faith working through love. You ran well. Who hindered you from obeying the truth? This persuasion does not come from him who calls you. A little leaven leavens the whole lump. Again, you were doing well. And what happened? Who is it that hindered you from obeying the truth? Even after one becomes a Christian, there's truth to obey. It's not just obeying the truth to become a Christian. There's still truth that we obey after we become Christians and to live a faithful life. Still that. But somebody hindered them, convinced them to try to go back to the old way. And it started out little. A little leaven leavens the whole lump. Whoever influenced them this way did just a little bit. And then that little bit began to grow. And before you know it, before they knew it, the whole congregation was thinking in the wrong way, and the whole congregation was falling from grace. So generally that's the way false doctrine starts. It starts little. It doesn't just come in all at once, but it starts in a small way. And it can have a lot of dire consequences to it. In verse 10 through 12, I have confidence in you, in the Lord, that you will have no other mind, but he who troubles you shall bear his judgment, whoever he is. Well, Paul feels confident that they're going to change, that they're going to listen to him. They're going to see the error of their way, and they're going to repent. And you know who it is that's troubling you, and you're going to get rid of him. Take him out. He doesn't need to be there. Verse 11, and I, brethren, if I still preach circumcision, why do I suffer persecution? Apparently some of these false brethren, they were saying, Paul teaches this. Paul teaches you need to go back to the old law. You need to be circumcised to be saved. You need to keep all these special days to be saved. But Paul said, I'm not teaching that. If I did, why am I still being persecuted? If he's going along with what they're doing. But he says there, then the offense of the cross has ceased. I could wish that those who trouble you would even cut themselves off. Paul says they don't need to be there. They don't need to be there. They need to be gotten rid of and taken out. Now, there's certain people that the church doesn't need. And that may sound like a very cruel, but for a troublemaker, church doesn't need a troublemaker. It needs to go. Go somewhere else. Do something else. And there's been times when individuals have been asked to leave in congregations. Not going to have it here. Trying to always stir up something. It's time to ask them to go. So that's what Paul is saying here. These individuals who are stirring you up, they got to go. Got to go. And then 13 and 14. For you, brethren, have been called to liberty. Only do not use liberty as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. For all the law is fulfilled in one word, even this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Talks about liberty. For you, brethren, have been called to liberty. But don't use this liberty as an opportunity to serve the flesh. I have watched, you can find anything on the internet. I have watched the members of the church who have left. And they give the reasons why they have left. And many times, they will say, I felt like I felt like having freedom. I was being told this and told to do this and that. And I didn't want to be told what to do, is what it came down to. I didn't want somebody to tell me that I had to attend every Sunday, first day of the week. I wanted freedom to do what I wanted to do. I didn't want somebody to tell me that I have to give them my means every first day of the week, or I got to take the Lord's Supper every day. I didn't want somebody to tell me that there was only one church, and I wanted everything to be good and great. That's where some have taken this, the very way that Paul is warning these people don't take it, because they're looking at this, I got all this liberty. Paul said, no, you don't. There's still laws to follow even in the New Testament. Just because we're not under an old law doesn't mean that we're not under law, period. We're under law. We're still commanded to come together on the first day of the week. We're still commanded to take the Lord's Supper. We're still commanded to give of our means. We're still commanded to pray and assemble together. That's all there. But you have some who don't like that. They don't like it. I want my freedom to do what I want to do. Nobody to tell me what to do. And this is where Paul is saying, don't let this get out of hand. Yes, you do have freedom because you can make a mistake, and God has put in provision to cover that mistake, to forgive you by living faithful. That provision was not under the Old Testament. You made a mistake, you sinned, you paid dearly for it, but it's not the same. So love your neighbor as yourself is what he's telling them here. Love them as yourself. But don't use this new law to go about and to sin. Don't do that. Any questions? We'll start verse 15 next week. Any questions on this or comments? All right. We can learn from this what Paul's telling them here. How we can be more faithful and serve the Lord.